VikesNow, I'm Dustin Baker. It is the April 24th edition, one day after my daughter's birthday. She turned 12 yesterday. It was a great day. They went and saw Dungeons & Dragons, had some ice cream, and went to a burger joint. That was my Sunday. But today, right now, we're going to do more draft stuff, and we're coming to a grand climax, a 3-day-long climax, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, with this ultra mysterious Vikings NFL draft. And if you're wondering, why does this draft feel so much different than the years past? Like, we don't have any idea, like a number one with a bullet prediction what they're going to do. Well, it's pretty simple. For about at least half of a decade, the offensive line sucked. So I think everybody kind of looked around and said, yeah, let's go get a good offensive lineman and call it good. And that's pretty much what happened, whether it was Darisaw or the attempt on Bradbury or Brian O'Neill in round 2 in 2018. Offensive line was always the most frustrating and glaring need, and that's kind of been vanquished because of Darisaw and O'Neill. And then you have Kirk Cousins is only contractually committed to the Vikings through the end of this upcoming season, which really set a torch to draft prognostications, because you would think, as smart of a front office as we believe they have, they'll probably want to get the next guy in the building. But where will it come from? A trade up, staying put for Hendon Hooker, or just picking some dude like Dorian Thompson-Robinson in round 4 or so? And then, of course, Adam Thielen left last month for the Panthers, so we've had this robust debate about whether KJ Osborne is a WR2. If you believe he is not, then the Vikings probably need to draft Jordan Addison or Quentin Johnson. So it's really all over the board as to what they're going to do, and I think that's why this draft cycle has been so awe-inspiring in terms of theories. Like, it's gone back and forth. I think cornerback CB is probably the most prominent roster need. But as you'll find out here, I don't think it will be a cornerback, although I agonized over that prediction, and I'll get to that right now, as soon as right now, in fact. So I kind of ranked these outcomes in likelihood before I reveal the pick, the guy. But I want to explain to you how I got there. I'm not going to come on Vikes now and just say, Joe Schmo, have a great day, guys and gals. No, I'm going to explain it. So I think out of my 5 scenarios, the least likely, although it would not be stunning, would be a trade up the board for a quarterback. And in the last 4 days, the steam for the Vikings possibly doing this is all over the place. Chad Reuter from NFL.com, in his last mock draft or final mock draft of the season, predicted the Vikings go up to 10, 2 first-rounders and a third, the price that was paid for Patrick Mahomes in 2017, spending that to the Eagles to get Anthony Richardson. And then kind of out of nowhere, today Peter King was like, oh, no, Richardson's going to fall all the way to the Vikings at 23. And then in between, there's been trade up for Levis, tidbits, even as high as 3, which would be really weird. But I think trading up the board for a quarterback is a real possibility. But in my 5 most likely scenarios, that would be the bottom one. We shall see. Number 4 is just staying put or maybe trading back a little bit and drafting the wide receiver for life after Thielen. I cannot for the life of me figure out if the Minnesota Vikings trust KJ Osborne to be the WR2. I think I've settled on yes, they do. And then maybe they'll draft a wide receiver in round 3, like a Cedric Tillman, and let the chips fall. I would not be surprised one iota if they select a wide receiver. But on my list, that's number 4. Before a free agency, this was the one that I kind of predicted they needed to do so they could get really, really rich on offense. But my enthusiasm that is dampened as I have began to believe that Osborne is the WR2. Number 3 is staying put and selecting Joey Porter in terms of likelihood if he's there. Now, my problem is I don't think that he'll be there. I think he'll go somewhere like the Commanders or I don't know if he could get past the Steelers, because that's where his dad, made his fame and money. But staying put and drafting a sure thing corner like Joey Porter would be number 3. Number 2 would be a trade back for a cornerback, CB. And we're looking at Deonte Banks here, Kaylee Ringo from Georgia. This is the one I basically, Saturday night, I came to my senses and I was like, just stick with cornerback. That's what they're going to do. That's what they need the most for long-term trajectory, especially if Booth and Evans don't turn into Pro Bowlers. So my number 2 was a cornerback after a trade back, a CB. But number 1, after a lot of deliberation, my prediction, my first round prediction for these Minnesota Vikings is a trade back on the board and then a selection of a defensive tackle, and I have that as Brian Breesy from Clemson, probably late in the first round or early in the second round. That's what I'm locking in, especially the defensive tackle part. I guess in theory, Maisie Smith from Michigan would make sense, and then Kalijah Cansey from Pittsburgh could also fill the shoes or fill the spots of this prediction, but I'm sticking with Brian Breesy as the guy that the Vikings select probably at the very end of round 1 or maybe the very beginning of second round. So I'm going to explain why. Now, it was real close between cornerback and defensive tackle, but I want to emphasize the trade back part because I think they need to stockpile draft assets after the TJ Hawkinson trade. I think that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah with his value speech wants to get more picks and then can still get what I consider a blue chip talent in Breesy. This would be the first defensive lineman chosen by the Vikings in rounds 1 or 2 in 10 years. Thankfully, they found Danielle Hunter in round 3. Everson Griffin had a wonderful career, and he was a round 4 pick. Let's see, Brian Robinson, what was he done after 2016 or 2017? So they always find ways to make the trenches, or especially the edges, hum, and they don't have to spend first-round draft capital. In fact, on edge rushers, the Vikings haven't used a first-rounder on an edge rusher since 2005, Erasmus James, who was one of the worst value picks in team history. So we've had this long drought on defensive tackles and defensive linemen in general. So I think that's going to come to an end. While Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was employed by the 49ers, he was there for 8 drafts. That's where he learned. He was the director of research and all that. That's where he got the analytics reputation. In 8 drafts, in rounds 1 and 2, the 49ers selected 6 defensive linemen, 3 safeties, 3 wide receivers, 2 offensive linemen, 1 running back, 1 tight end, 1 linebacker, 0 cornerbacks, and 0 quarterbacks because they had Kaepernick and Jimmy Garoppolo for the last 3 or 4 years of Adofo-Mensah in San Francisco. But the big thing with flashing lights here is Adofo-Mensah, 8 drafts with 49ers, which was his roots, his infancy. They drafted defensive linemen, 6 of them, rounds 1 and 2 of 8 drafts, more than anything else. This is what this guy knows, is fortifying the trenches and then kind of figuring it out later when it comes to cornerbacks and safeties. And I think that this will pan out. This is why I've arrived at this prediction, is it'll be a defensive tackle because Kwesi will want to emulate the 49ers, who have consistent and constant success, even when they just have some guy, Brock Purdy, at quarterback. And for too long, the Vikings have relied on defensive tackles who are somewhat anonymous. Hope that isn't too rude of a term, but Shamar Stephen, forever, was just the Zimmer solution at Breesy's spot. Underwhelming, in my opinion. Jonathan Bullard was the guy there last year. I guess he's decent. Armin Watts, we thought he was going to be it for 1 year. And then, he got shockingly cut last summer, played for the Bears, and now, where the heck did he go? I can't even remember where he went. He signed somewhere. And then in between, this is Sheldon Richardson was there for 2 years, and he was actually pretty good. But all of those are, in my opinion, half-measured solutions, and Richardson was exciting, but he only lasted 1 year each time, 2018 and 2021. So I think that the days of just having some dude at defensive tackle should be done. I think they realize it, and that's why I have Brian Breesy as the pick. So it fully is ingrained with build the trenches. The offensive line is starting to feel a little bit more set than it once was. But I want to emphasize, at least hedging the bet here, that I really agonized back and forth between defensive tackle and cornerback because it's Andrew Booth, Juwan Williams, Byron Murphy, and a Caleb Evans. And I don't know if that's enough juice to have a good defense in the modern NFL, but what do we say on this show? It will continue to say for 5 months. You kind of just trust Brian Flores to know what he's doing. I think he'll have a significant voice in this draft room, and you couple his success and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's resume of drafting edge rushers and defensive tackles, I am locking it in, a defensive tackle for the Vikings' first pick, whenever that may be, 23, 29, 33, somewhere. And I've got Brian Breesy, Clemson, to really help rectify this defense that was exposed against the Giants. All right, tomorrow I'll be back. Probably some more draft predictions on the whole. And then Wednesday, Josh Fry will be with us he's going to give his predictive mock draft. Last week he gave what he would do if he was in charge. Now he's going to do basically what I did and tell you who his first pick and down the line is. That's all we got. We'll see you this week about at least 4 or 5 more times. Skol, baby.